Hello, everyone. Again, this is Frank McNally from Public Spend Forum. Good afternoon or good late morning to you, depending on where you are in the country today. It's about 2 o'clock Eastern Time, which is our appointed hour. So we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar on how to find cybersecurity suppliers on GovShop. So I'm going to turn it over to our host and fearless leader, Raj Sharma, to kick things off, and looking forward to our discussion. Thanks. Raj?
Thanks, Frank. Welcome, everyone, to another one of our webinars, the series, How to Find. And today we're going to focus on how to find cybersecurity suppliers. It's a vast and extensive market, as I've learned over the past few months. I'm not an expert, but I will help guide the discussion, and we do have a guest who we're excited to have, Spence Witten from Lunarline. Welcome, Spence.
Thank you, Raj.
Great, and so we'll Spence and I will be really guiding the discussion here and sharing some of the insights that we have, as well as hopefully get some questions from you as we proceed. So, so as I mentioned. Maybe we can just start off with brief intros, and then we can jump into some of our discussions. Spence, why don't you go ahead?
Absolutely. So hello, everyone. Good afternoon or good morning, as Frank said, based on where you are today. My name is Spence Witten, and I'm the Vice President of Global Sales at Lunarline. Lunarline's a pure-play cybersecurity company, about half federal, half private sector focused. And I've been a participant in GovShop since the inception. It's really changed both the quality and the quantity of interactions that I have with procurement officials at state, federal, and local levels, and particularly on the quality side. It's really improved my ability to differentiate my products and services, communicate those, and help interested parties find and evaluate me in a neutral, independent setting. So it's just been a wonderful tool as a vendor, and I've seen how folks in the procurement community have also used it to improve the way they look for sources. And so I've been involved in the cybersecurity industry for about 10 years. I've seen it grow from this really small minor thing to this massive conglomerate with all sorts of different divisions and companies and players and investors, and how that's complicated the procurement landscape for folks. And I'm really excited to be able to walk people through how, GovShop can help kind of carve through some of that mess and make sense of an exploding, huge, massive industry.
Great. Well, and I'm definitely excited to hear some of your insights, Spence, as we discussed previously as well. And I'm Raj Sharma. I'm the founder and CEO of Public Spend Forum, and I'm guiding some of the development on GovShop. I've worked with governments and both private sector as well as government for the past 25 years. So still learning, and no doubt we'll continue learning. So let me just jump in here and go to the next slide. If I can get my computer to work. So we're going to live insights, and then we'll do a demo. So first we'll be discussing the cybersecurity use cases. And really, what are we seeing in terms of, as we look at demand out there, what are the different types of needs that government uses cybersecurity for? And then how should you think about suppliers relative to those needs? And then we'll do a short demo just to show you how to find companies within GovShop as we proceed. So let's just jump. Again, just a quick introduction to GovShop. GovShop, if you are not familiar, you can visit it at govshop.com. It's a free supplier research platform or site where we're providing suppliers and detailed profiles on those suppliers. Let me just skip ahead here. So GovShop's goal really is to do two things. First is to really help you identify a full comprehensive list of suppliers. So we know the markets are fast changing, and there's a lot happening at any given time, as Spence also mentioned. And so keeping up with any market is very difficult. So we'd like to do that for you. And so we're not just giving you a list of kind of the typical companies you know, but also who are the emerging companies, startups, minority companies that others may be using. So you find a comprehensive supplier base. And second is really give you more and more detail. We're building on this, but we've been really consulting with both government and suppliers on what kinds of information should we be providing. So we'll be talking a bit about that. And then hopefully you'll see it's a pretty intuitive, easy to use interface. And that was important to us. And then we're leveraging all sorts of technology to really gather data and provide data, as well as working with suppliers to provide you data. So we're applying all sorts of technology like machine learning, AI, and blockchain, and we'll continue to develop this. But we'll show you more during the demo. So let me just go ahead and jump into the discussion here and bring Spence into the discussion. So first of all, I want to start off by just mentioning what we've done in the cybersecurity arena. So you know some of the context behind some of the information that we present. So we started looking at this market, you know, a while back. A few months ago, we had gotten a lot of requests for government. Now, GovShop covers all markets, but we're also diving deep into some markets to start. And so cybersecurity was one of them. Really, it was driven by the vast need and the government has, right? Governments at all levels, federal, state, local. So what we started doing was first, as it shows on this slide, we researched the market and talked to some experts like Spence, like others, that are really deep experts on you know, how the market is structured, what type of capabilities there are. And what we found was it's a really complex market. And you know, we started looking at taxonomy. That's how we organize much of the information within GovShop. So how would you organize companies based on, you know, the types of different things they may be doing? And what we found was that there was no single answer, right, as you would expect, but there were honestly many answers. So we came up with a structure, again, that we believe encapsulates all those different frameworks we saw out there. Is it perfect? Probably not. But we do think it's comprehensive and trying to capture most of kind of what firms are doing out there. So I'm just curious, Spence, you know, I've kind of shown a screenshot and we can show the real version online. But how do you think about, you know, this taxonomy here, or in general, you know, how we should be classifying firms?
Well, I think you've done a wonderful job. And so this is, to me, one of the GovShop's major strengths, is that the traditional ways that procurement professionals, you know, at any level, we're talking federal, state, local, large enterprise, look for goods and services are through, you know, NAICS codes and PSC codes, and, you know, various different other forms of classification. And they just haven't kept pace with the industry. And it's one of the, it's actually frustrating as a vendor how many different solutions have popped up through the industry, you know, across over the last decade that I've been involved, because, you know, one of my jobs for my clients is to help them navigate this explosion in vendors and help them make smart cyber decisions and smart cyber procurement decisions. And, you know, so I feel like the way you've broken it down is perfect. I mean, so a great example is cloud security. So cloud security was not something folks were talking about 4 years ago. As you can see, I mean, there's no great code for classifying cloud security vendors. I mean, the PSC and the NAICS code systems are not set up for that. And so what that complicates procurement professionals' lives is that's cloud security has emerged as a niche. I mean, there are players who are really strong in that, and some strong in that to the exclusion of other things. And so when you want to narrow down on those niches, I don't feel like existing procurement resources or procurement research solutions for procurement officials solve that problem. They don't help you think through the industry in this kind of way. And so I think you've nailed it. I mean, you can always quibble about specific categories, but, you know, endpoint security, that's obviously a unique area. It's a mature market. Solution providers are very focused on that. You want to be able to drill into those folks directly rather than, say, for example, going to, you know, commodity IT services systems integrator. I mean, if you want endpoint security, you should go to a focused, mature company that does that. And I think you've really nailed that with GovShop's taxonomy.
Great, great. I can tell you, my head was spinning many times when I was looking at all these different taxonomies. And they're just, especially for someone who's not an expert, there's a lot there to digest. And so hopefully, we've given you kind of a way to parse apart these firms. But also, we would encourage everyone to just give us feedback, and we'll continue to incorporate some of that feedback in here. But what we did do after, thinking through the taxonomy and how should we be classifying firms, let's say, in terms of what capabilities or what areas they're addressing within this taxonomy, we looked at also then we started identifying the second bullet point here on the right side, traditional as well as emerging companies. So we said, there are thousands of companies you'll see if you search on GovShop, if you just search the term cyber. But we also started digging deeper. That's one of the things we're trying to do is really almost, in addition to kind of data engineering, we're doing a lot of research. We have research teams. So they're digging in so you don't have to. And we identified a number of companies that are kind of leading the way. And then we started building profiles, which is an ongoing process. So we'll share some of that data with you. Let me just go to the next slide here. This just shows there's over 800 companies, at least within kind of this taxonomy structure. And then there's a lot more you'll see, thousands of them when you search on cyber. So we're continuing to classify, but you can get a sense as we go through this, what types of companies are in our database. So let's just turn to a discussion of use cases, as I had mentioned. Now, to think about use cases, what we did and what we're doing across different markets is, first, we review lots of government opportunities, not just federal government, but state and local as well as, we might pull in private sector opportunities as well. But what we're trying to understand is what are the different use cases, especially for government, when they're going out and buying cyber. And so we downloaded hundreds of opportunities that were current as well as past. And then we went through the painful process of actually reading many of these and trying to segment them to think about, okay, what are the types of things people are really trying to address? So that was kind of, let's call it demand analysis that we did. And we thought it's really important to do that if we're going to segment vendors, right? And help you find companies to understand how government buys, what are they buying. So what you see here then is, a rough framework here of how we segmented demand for government or the use cases we looked at. So it starts with, everything from strategy and planning to continuous cyber monitoring, right, to actual firms that are providing, say, identity and access management products. So this is kind of how we started thinking about demand. And I'd like to really bring in Spence. What do you think? When you think about use cases in government, how do you think about it?
Well, so I definitely want to call attention to how important this is for, particularly for, actually, it's both for vendors and procurement folks. So one of the major challenges that I've seen federal buyers have when they approach the cybersecurity market is, cutting through contractor and vendor puffery. And so it's really easy for me as a cybersecurity vendor. Let's say I'm really good at the strategy and planning side, right? But what I really want to do is cyber engineering. A cyber engineering opportunity comes up. It's really easy for me to twist my past performance to make it look like I actually have cyber engineering past performance so I can gain access to that new capability area. And so what I really like about GovShop is that it helps procurement officials drill down on specific areas of cybersecurity that are most relevant for their procurements, to conduct market research, maybe even have sort of initial discussions with vendors to kind of get the lay of the landscape, reach out to specific individuals in the field who may be able to provide guidance on what they're trying to do from a procurement perspective. That's extremely important, extremely powerful, and it meets a weakness I've seen in procurements coming out of the federal space in particular, but also at state and local, where organizations are building, federal agencies or state governments are building these procurements, thinking they're buying one thing, but they're actually gearing the requirements towards another. And on the vendor side, it gives me an opportunity to really fine tune how I talk about my capabilities in a really open, honest manner that then federal procurement folks can find me. And I'm less like, I'm not shaping my experience towards a specific requirement. I'm just honestly describing what I do, and giving procurement folks a great venue for finding me and reading, sort of neutral, independent, my own description of what my capabilities are. And I think that's really important. It's a major weakness that's seen in a lot of procurements at the federal, state, and local level in cybersecurity.
So Spence, could we maybe, that's great. And could you expand upon maybe just the use cases here a little bit? Are there any particular ones that stand out to you in terms of when we're thinking about government use cases? I think we saw a lot, for instance, if we were to show a graph of what are the different types of opportunities, for instance, there's a lot going on in cyber monitoring. Definitely in the first two bullet points, strategy and planning, where people are just trying to figure out what their cyber strategy should be, right? There are CIOs that are chartered with this now. There's a lot of, there's a lot of even higher than CIOs there in governance being put in place to just chartering this. And then you have cyber audits just to get an assessment of where the weak points are in your infrastructure. Is there anything specific here that you'd like to point out in terms of, what you're seeing in terms of use cases?
Sure. So cyber monitoring is a wonderful example to dive on, and actually cyber training and workforce is another one, because I know it has immediate relevance to some of the attendees here. So with cyber monitoring, we're seeing a major shift in how federal and state governments approach monitoring. They're moving from let's build our own in-house security operations centers to, let's look at maybe outsourcing some of that to, let's figure out if we can evolve towards this managed detection and response, really high-end, tech-enabled, AI-enabled incident response capabilities. So, when you build a use case built around these specific areas, and then you use something like GovShop to drill down even further, it really helps you segment, quickly understand the market, understand the different providers, their strengths and weaknesses, and position a procurement appropriately. I see a lot of procurements fail when organizations don't go through that process. They're building out a security operations center capability, but they're only talking to managed security services firms because they showed up under a simple code search for a provider, or they're really looking at amazing, cool tools in the MDR space, but they're not even near that level of maturity. And so, thinking through a use case like this and then turning to a tool like GovShop to drill down even deeper solves that huge problem in the federal space. Another great example is training and awareness. So, and workforce development. This is an area in cyber that has seen a whole ton of growth. Particularly, LearnLine's a major player in the school of cybersecurity, and it's gotten really specialized. Lots of companies provide training, but they don't necessarily provide true training and workforce development aligned to some of the new federal cybersecurity regulatory standards that have come out. And so I think the use case model that you've taken is really, not just useful, but also highly appropriate to the intended audience at the federal, state, and local level, who should go through these exercises in conjunction with a tool like GovShop to really improve their ability to narrow in on specific requirements and vendors that are actually geared towards solving those challenges.
Great, yeah, and I think that's what we're trying to do, and I think these use cases continue to evolve. So we're going to continue to keep track of kind of what we're seeing in terms of demand patterns, et cetera. But I think that's a really important part of from a procurement standpoint too. I think you've kind of elaborated on this, but really, before, oftentimes I think we jump into a procurement and start looking at understanding vendors, et cetera, when we don't have a deep enough understanding of what's the use case, what problem are we trying to solve, what kind of capability is going to be required. So I think understanding where along, whether it's, if you segment it this way, if you think about, your kind of needs, does it fall into one of these buckets, or maybe there's a different one? But the important point being really understanding what is that need, and then thinking about what kind of capabilities are going to be required is really important and critical before you start digging into the market, right? So.
And on the evaluation side too. I mean, that's something that also is worth, a great cyber strategy and planning company looks very different from a great cyber monitoring company, which looks very different from a great cyber training and workforce company. And so one thing that, we've worked with Public Spend Forum before that we've talked about a lot is, structuring evaluation criteria to really identify the right providers. And so, thinking about the cyber market like this is really important because it also helps you think through what attributes of these organizations actually make them effective at cyber engineering, or make them effective at cyber products, and how do I write evaluation criteria that actually really reward those providers, so I don't end up with a great strategy and planning company executing on my engineering project, because that's a recipe for poor performance on a contract.
Yeah. No, and I think those distinctions are really important. And so if we go to that, I think it's a good segue to go to the next slide. I think we've talked a bit about this already, but maybe we could dig in a little bit deeper. As I mentioned, you start with the use case and a good understanding of that. Honestly, if you don't have that understanding, even if some customer hands you a statement of work that's already prepared, right? It's really important to go ask good questions and try to understand, what the need is. But then understanding, what are the different types of providers that can meet your needs, right? That's one of the first things you want to do in the market. Look at the market. How is it structured? Who are the types of players in the market? I put down a very simple segmentation. We're still thinking through this, honestly. But here's a simple segmentation of the cyber vendors that I thought would be a useful starting point. One, you have these kind of large systems integrators that do everything, but they also have cyber as an offering, and they can really kind of do soup to nuts, right? They might not be providing software products per se, but they do things from planning and strategy to even kind of outsourcing monitoring, right? And then you have more pure play cyber security firms, actually firms like LunarLine, who have much deeper expertise and really are putting all their effort against one area like cybersecurity. And then you have software firms, which are not necessarily doing things like audits or monitoring, but they have, for instance, identity and access management software. And typically, most of them have some services, right, support services, et cetera, attached. But this is one way to think about it. But I'm curious, Spence, again, how do you think about, are there other ways you would think about like the different types of vendors?
Yeah, so there's a couple different ways to slice that, but I think what it comes down to is it's almost more, it's just like, it's amusing to me, or it's sometimes frustrating how certain contracts that, for example, a systems integrator would be ideally suited to execute on end up going to that pure play cyber company, or how a software product and development company wind up in a systems integration role, and how it does. I mean, it leads to poor performance on contracts. And so, I think even more so than cutting up the specific targets or specific types of vendors, is just understanding that you can do that with this industry. This industry's gotten so complicated that it really is important to understand that. And so, like, for example, systems integrators are really effective in a procurement where you're going to be blending cybersecurity and IT. So systems integrators tend to have those diversified skill sets that can bring those worlds together. Like LunarLine, we don't do that, right? We don't touch standard IT operations. It's not that I can't. I can help IT programs build cybersecurity, or build secure systems and build cybersecurity into deployments. But I can't also, manage a help desk deployment at the same time. Not as a prime contractor. So if you have that requirement set, understanding that, and understanding that there's that combination, and using a tool like Gov Shop to help identify companies that are really, really good at that, advertise that, talk about it, have great content on it, have wonderful past performance doing that. You're going to be setting a procurement up for success. Alternatively, if you have a really niche, systems integrators tend to be a mile wide and an inch deep in terms of capability. They might not have wonderful cyber forensic skills, in which case, understanding that there are these pure play cybersecurity specialist firms that you can identify folks that are really great at doing that one thing, again, can help set the procurement up for success. And it's something where I think because we haven't equipped federal, state, and local procurement officials with the tools to find those vendors, they tend to default to one type or another. Maybe they'll always turn to systems integrators because that's who they're used to working with, or they'll always turn to pure play cybersecurity specialist firms. And again, it's not the best model in an industry that's as innovative and fast changing as cybersecurity. It's not the most effective way to solve problems.
That's great. I think the way you described kind of the example with, the systems integrators was great. And I think what I would stress also is that, as you're looking at this, really try to think about what's the most critical thing, and that's going to really kind of drive the results you're seeking, going back to the use case, right? So if you're trying to address some specific, so let's say some specific vulnerability in the system, right? And you have some specific threats or, attacks that have taken place, there might be a very specialized type of firm that you need to look at, right? And as opposed to say, well, we've got some, already some firm on contract on this vehicle, so let's just go because they do cybersecurity, generally speaking. Now, I think, and we see that a lot, right? And this generic approach, and there's more thought put towards, well, how do we streamline the procurement because it's a pain, right? And at the expense of, honestly, the capability. So what happens is you end up going back to the market later. So I would just suggest that you really understand, some of these areas, like if you're talking about cyber coaching, for instance, and training, and there's firms, again, that are specialized in that. If you're trying to build your capability, your team's capability alongside, your CIO, Chief Information Officer, is looking to, build the capability within your agency, alongside another firm. You might want to look at, not, again, just a firm that you will say and, write a good proposal and tell you they can do this. Do they actually have a training program? Have they proven it before? What kind of results have they shown? That's really important.
And it has pricing impact too. So, some areas in cybersecurity have gotten pretty commoditized. And so a cyber assessment's a great example. I mean, if you're a federal procurement official, you don't need to spend a lot of money for cyber assessments. You don't need, a large systems integrator that, tend to have higher rates, banging away on simple security assessments. That's, the small business community is extremely well suited to that. Really small companies are really well suited to that with great rates and limited overhead. But at the same time, some of those other services get pretty expensive. So for example, monitoring, Lunar Line, we maintain 24/7 monitoring facilities, on our own that we provide, as an outsourced support center for various different federal agencies. We have data centers in Arlington, Virginia, we have data center in Ohio, and that stuff gets expensive. And so it changes your rate structure. And so I will never be price competitive with those, smaller firms on pure assessment contracts. And I don't try to be. That's not the area where we compete. But at the same time, I know that those smaller, lower cost providers can't be competitive with me on capability. They just can't. So understanding how the industry breaks down, understanding the different players, their strengths and weaknesses in the different divisions also helps you understand how to price, how to evaluate pricing, and how to understand price realism going into major procurement efforts. Another area where we see a lot of procurement failure is where either the federal government overpays for commoditized services, or they underpay. They'll lump a really complex technical requirement, into a largely assessment-based solicitation. So the solicitation will be 80%, commoditized assessment work, and then 20% really, really hard stuff, all competed on at that really low, cut rate commoditized pricing. And then of course those providers can't end up competing on those higher those greater technical challenges. Another thing to look at too that falls in line with the different types of providers. And one that we might also want to think about is sort of the outside the norm providers. And Raj, you alluded to this on the previous slide. So, we have sort of standard traditional GovCon players, right? And they have a role to play. They're important. Sometimes you need organizations that are just set up to do business with the federal government, understand the way the federal government works. That's all they do. Great. The cybersecurity, a lot of the best, most elite players are actually outside the norm of traditional government contracting, the government contracting pool. It's a different set of providers with different capabilities. And so I think, when you're thinking about different types of providers that might meet your needs, consider if you want to get some really fresh, innovative thinking into an agency, to solve non-traditional problems. Maybe looking outside the traditional GovCon pool would be useful to you. And understand that comes with issues, right? They don't necessarily know the RFP process. Their pricing isn't necessarily aligned to, GSA schedule standards. The pricing is also probably higher because they work with a different set of clientele. But GovShop can also help not just you find those vendors, but those types of vendors for the vendors that are, on the line here, will help you communicate your unique capabilities to the government and help them find you, even if you're not used to navigating that complexity.
Great. Yeah, no, I think we could continue this part of the discussion for a long time. But I think the main point, and I kind of stress to everyone in here, is that, don't understand the use case. Don't lump everything, because it's really important. These markets are complex for a reason, right? And so just lumping everything into kind of, a big giant thing, or just treating every vendor the same is, I think, one of the kind of the biggest issues that we see. So let me just go to the next slide then. I just want to, I think, jump into the demo here, but we'll also have a discussion as we go through it. So again, what we'll do with the demo here is that we'll show you just the basics, some of the search functionality, about how to find cyber companies, how you can filter. We'll show you what kind of data is in there and what other data we're trying to populate, and then how you can save and share. So let me just kind of switch out of this, and I'll go to my browser here. So here we are on GovShop's website. Hopefully you all have seen this before. So if you haven't, you can just go to govshop.com. We encourage you to go right away and sign up. So let me just go through a simple demo, and Spence, please, keep kind of the conversation going here. In terms of anything you see, but just to kind of give people a lay of the land, is that GovShop, we've architected it to really make search easier, and we're continuing to improve that. So you can come in here and you can basically search by putting in a keyword here, and it will look across. I'll show you in a second. Look across all our data to see what matches. But then you can go directly to search by these commodity codes that Spence was mentioning earlier. We have product service code, that's the PSC, NAICS code, North American Industrial Classification System, but I think everybody knows it as NAICS. We have NIGP as well for state local governments. And then, over time, we have the PSF code that we'll be showing you, which is really, we're organizing it hopefully in a more dynamic way than some of these other code structures. You can also search by...
Raj, I'm actually impressed that you know what NAICS stands for, because I always forget. But I think to me, one of the coolest things about that is that it just seamlessly marries a normal, traditional, Google style search that we're all familiar with, where you can just type in whatever you need and get great results, with the more structured approach that procurement officials usually approach searching for vendors. So you have both right there, really simple. And we know we all know here how complicated the kind of traditional searching tools are, like FPDS. And this is not that. It takes all of that data and puts it in a really nice modern interface and makes it really easy to find data and make decisions.
Great. Well, what I'm showing here is the commodity code section, where you have these different codes. You can click on each one, or you can just go to search across all codes. You can do a drop down and look at all these codes, or you can just, if you don't know the codes, you can just put in cyber, for instance. So we'll come back to this and see which codes match up. And then if I go back to the main screen, then the other method is by contract vehicle. So I'll just click on this. So you can search if you want across all types of contracts, or you could say, I just want to look across the federal supply schedules. I want to look across other types of, large contracts in the federal government. National cooperatives, we're building this library. We already have many contracts, but we're continuing to build that. And you can look across there. You can also, by the way, this is a list view. You can do the same kind of view as the commodity code structure. You can see this tree structure and which contracts are already in there. So you can do that same thing for federal supply schedule. You can do that for GWACs, et cetera. So you can search across here, for instance, again, and just like the commodity code section, you can say cyber, and boom, you can see which kinds of contract vehicles are in there that have cyber in that, or other keywords for that matter that may link back. So I'll just go back to the home screen again. And so I want to just show you.
So actually, Raj, can I jump in there too? Because it's also really useful as a vendor, because I don't, like, we get really confused sometimes. Because, so for example, I'm not on Oasis, which is a major contract vehicle, but sometimes cyber opportunities come out on Oasis. And unless I have a friend who's on Oasis that I can call to look for that, I don't necessarily know, what's happening on those vehicles. And so while there's not specific opportunities here, I can at least see that, cybersecurity is active on those contracts and then providers on those contracts. So it's really useful for me as a vendor to be able to see the ebbs and flows of cybersecurity across various different vehicles, so I can plan my 2, 3, 4, 5 year vehicle strategy to align to ones that I know where cyber is really active. That's really important for me.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. And I think over time we'll have some other data as well. I don't want to talk too much about what's coming down the pipe, but there will be data that allows you to kind of understand what kinds of opportunities are coming on different contracts, et cetera. But let me just so jump in here. And so what I can do here, sorry, my screen seems to be bugging out a little bit here. So I can go into the main screen. I can just enter the term cyber, for instance. And then what you see is those 3 things that I talked about. You can search by keywords. What it's showing me is, first, how many suppliers have the term cyber. So right now it's showing 61, so 6,132 suppliers. So I can just press enter and see the list of suppliers that have this term. Then I can also see these commodity codes. Now I can see, it's showing me all the commodity codes that have cyber in it. So I can click on one of these, or I can click on the show all commodity codes. Let me just expand the screen size a little bit, so in case you can't see. So hopefully that's better. So now you can see there's the suppliers, there's commodity codes, and it's also showing us which contract vehicles are matching up with cyber. So you can decide, which way you want to take your search. What I'll do for our demonstration purposes is take you to the cyber page here. So I'll click on this. And so where you end up now is you're seeing the cybersecurity page where we've classified 850 companies. We know there were 6,100 companies that I said that had the word cyber, but we're going through and basically pulling out the companies that have, deeper capabilities and putting them on this page. So we'll continue to do that. So now you're on this cybersecurity page. So from here, you can see, first of all, there's a definition of the page in terms of what cybersecurity includes. And then you can also see, if you wanted to, that taxonomy that I showed you in PowerPoint, it's right here. All the different classifications of how, or the, I guess, let's say the sub-commodity codes or the subcategories under the cybersecurity section that we have. So the same things you saw earlier: cloud security, endpoint security. So there's about 20 odd capabilities that we've listed. So you can go into one of these, or you can just search across all of them and just look at it at the overall cybersecurity level. So I'm going to, for demonstration purposes, just stick to the highest level. And so now you see there's a lot of companies here. And instead of looking at all of them this way, what we can do is go to our browse and filter page. So this way, you can slice and dice the data a bit more. I'm just going to click on this. And where we end up now is the really the listing where you can see all the filters on the left side. Again, I'm going to expand the screen size a little bit so you can see it a little bit better. So now you have the list here. One thing I want to show you here is you can toggle between this view and this list view. So we just set this up. The list view just allows you to, have more companies listed. People had asked us about it. And then, it also shows you how complete a profile looks like. So we're working on this a bit more so you can see actually what data is within a profile. So before you click that way, it can make your kind of searching and research a bit easier to say, I only want to see companies with a certain level of completeness in their profile, for instance. So that's how the data is depicted, but I'm going to go back to the previous view here. So I just go back here, and so what you can do here is then you can start to filter the data with some of these other dimensions. Before I do that, I just want to show you, I can also enter other terms. So I selected the commodity code, but I can just go in and say threat detection. Let's say this is one of our key requirements as part of cybersecurity is threat detection. So I enter that here, and now what I end up with is a few companies that have the term threat detection also in there. So they're part of our commodity cybersecurity section, but they also have the term threat detection in some way. So you can start to see that there's different types of firms over here. So you can go down this list. And then the other thing you can do is, so now let's say you've got a list of companies that you want to filter further before you start looking at all of them. Let's say, you're looking at specifically small business. Okay, small businesses. So now you can see that we went from 800 companies or so down to 552. Okay, you can apply other filters as well. Let's say you were looking to find out, how many of these companies or which companies are, STVOSB. So you see Lunar Line right here as well, for instance. So you can start to go down deeper and deeper and start to see. So we have 100 companies now that have, that are in our cyber directory, are small businesses, have threat detection in their kind of keywords, are STVOSB. So you can continue to narrow this down further and further.
And also, this process can help short circuit, some of the major frustrations on the RFI side with vendors, because I know that, a lot of times, particularly federal buyers will put out a request for information and just not get responses, and they'll be sort of bewildered as to what's going on, and maybe they'll think that there aren't service-disabled veteran-owned small businesses that can do threat detection. But a search like this shows you that that's actually clearly not the case. These people are here, and it might help you tailor your outreach and really make the RFI process a lot easier, both for respondents, vendors, as well as on the procurement side.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. And we are building some capability over time that will allow you to do RFIs right through here. And also we're working with vendors to basically prototype where we have an RFI that's already populated in here. So that's coming down the pike in the future. These are some of the filters. So we can just show you a couple of profiles here. Let me actually put Spence on the line here and see if we can walk through Lunar Line's profile, which I think is filled out fairly well. And so we can just walk through it to show you one example, and then we'll share another example as well after Lunar Lines. So Spence, you want to go ahead and walk through this yourself, or are you?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that immediately attracted me to GovShop was the ability to present relatively structured information that I know is relevant to my federal and state customers, but do so in a free-form manner that's not restricted. Like, for example, through what I would put into SAM. I get a lot more freedom to structure here. So, obviously I have a write-up that's geared around keywords that I would like. Again, this is keyword driven. You can do normal searches, and I want to show up for certain search terms, and I think a little bit about what those terms are, and I wrote the description accordingly. But then immediately underneath, I have data that is really important to federal organizations. So you can see my revenue, you can see how long I've been in business, you can see my security clearance levels. Obviously really critical to federal and also some state buyers to have that information right at hand. So easy for me to input, and also at a glance for federal and state procurement folks. I can also tag. So I have specialties and expertise. I can pick tags to the system tied to what I want to be found for. And so there's it's important. One of the nice things about SEO is it's important to be tailored in these descriptions. So I'm almost penalized for trying to do too much. And I know that, I focus these tags and I focus my description about who I really am, not, generic, fluffy past performance that's trying to be everybody to everyone. I really focused on what I want procurement people to be able to find using that search feature. And that's, part of the nice competitive process with search engine optimization, which is it's built into what GovShop's doing. I can provide the contact information, just like, you obviously could find this in SAM, but it's nice to be able to link it to capabilities. So if you wanted to talk to somebody, if you see the description and our size, our socioeconomic status, and the various different tags we have in place are relevant to what you're trying to do, you can reach out an email or phone really easily to find us and have more of a chat. And as a vendor, that's huge, right? It's really difficult to get a hold of folks at the federal, state, and local level that are doing purchasing. And so if you wanted to talk to me, if you felt like this resonated with what you're trying to do, you can immediately get hold of me, and that's really, really cool as a vendor. I mean, that's a great matchup between vendor and procurement side. Again, more data on who we are and our socioeconomic status and size that's critical for federal decision makers, and then also for major primes. I mean, it's also really a nice resource for major primes to be able to see this too, for teaming purposes.
Well,
one of my favorite. Oh, yeah, go ahead, Raj.
I was just going to mention, Spence, this section right here, we're revising it, and you'll see basically more dates and certifications. Like, so when does this expire, for instance, the SD, the OSP status, but also the ability for companies to put in other certification data. For instance, if they have ISO 9000 or some technical certification, let's say, they can add that here, because I know that's a lot of government customers are always looking for those things.
It would be so nice to be able to just post that and have the evidence right there. I mean, that would be great. And then likewise, I get a wonderful area to really put snippets about who we are. So, it's great for me to be able to communicate that succinctly. It's great for you because you don't have to wade through a website that's, designed for lots of different customer types, and you can just, click and read right here. I actually haven't filled out the past experience section, but I can provide some past performance information too. You have existing contracts. I mean, it's just this wealth of data. And what I love about what the GovShop team did is that, I think for people viewing this who are, understand this industry, they know that this is a huge volume of data, and that there's no other tool that does it this effectively, this succinctly, this nice of a user interface. I mean, this is just really friendly to read through. And as a vendor, that's great. I don't have any other resource anywhere where I can provide this volume of data, this organized, and have it available, confidentially and privately to federal, state, and local procurement people. It's just a fantastic resource for communicating who we are and providing downloadable content. So you don't need to, it's not gated content. It's not on my website. You don't have to. You can just get it all through the platform and learn about various different providers, and then jump from Lunarline to one of our competitors and see how we match up.
And by the way, I really like, for instance, the Lunarline has loaded all these documents as Spence mentioned. Typically every website is structured different. Even if you find the companies, right, you have to dig around, as you were saying, Spence, like to find, okay, where's public sector information, right? And how do I find the right information for what I'm looking for? Kind of really structured it here. And you can even go in, for instance, download right away, the products and solutions brochure, for instance. Or there's I know School of Cybersecurity, we were looking for cyber training, for instance. That, wow, this firm, okay, is not just a firm that says they do cyber training. They've actually got a catalog So you know right away that they specialize in something, right? And so a lot of information. We are working on the location served and cleaning that up a bit. But this is and Lunar9 again has done a really good job. One thing I just want to mention, as you said, Spence, is that a lot of government customers have asked us for products as well as past experience, the combination. So there's already other evidence in this profile that shows they have capabilities, like the catalogs themselves, right? Shows that okay, they actually have real capability in cyber training, for instance, right? So you already have some confirmation, but then the past experience is the other piece we're completing in here. So let me just go back then. So what you can do then is, let's just say you liked Lunar9, and what you can do is then go and say, okay, I want to save it to my list. And here you have saved suppliers. I've saved some other ones from before, so that's why it says 41. But you can actually pretty soon be able to do multiple projects and name them, but you can save it here. Then let's just say you've looked at some other firms and you looked at Lunar9 and Ventura, and let's just say you've already looked at all of these firms, and you can say, okay, let me check these. I want to share these with my colleague, right? And so boom, you can just go quickly send an email to them with their profile links, right? And then you've got you're talking to your colleagues. And we're building more collaboration tools like this. You can also take that same list and then do the same another thing off of it. Let's say you can do export. And so right now, you'll get it gives you some basic information, contact list, et cetera, and a link. So you can do that as well. And then there's some other functions we're adding over time, but these are some of the things you can do to really not just identify, but research and review, and then save these lists. So let me just go back to the cyber list for a second, all the way at the top. So I'm gonna clear actually all the filters. So I didn't do that here. And just to close this webinar out here. But again, now I just wanted to show you that you can also just search this way, and now we have a free form search with all companies listed here. So that's kind of the demo. I don't know if there's anything else right now, Spence, that you would like to mention about kind of, just searching on GovShop.
Just how easy it is. I mean, it's just, even as a vendor trying to find other vendors, I mean, there's really no tool I can think of at any cost, provides this type of insight that's not only, easy to search. I search it just like, I search a modern high-end search engine, and you guys have designed a great interface and wonderful search platform, but where all the data that's really relevant to decision making is right there and easy to work with. And as a vendor, again, that's huge for me to be able to provide that kind of focused messaging and content to federal, state, and local decision makers that anybody can drop in and find really quickly and work with. It's just there's nothing else. No one has attempted that for this market space.
Well, great, and I'm not seeing. I think that's great input, Spence. I think I want to see if there's any questions, Frank, from anyone before we close this out. No.
Sorry, my phone was being a little tricky. We didn't actually have any questions that need to be answered on air. There was a question about will the slides be provided, and yes, they will. Provide all the slides and information in our post-webinar recap tomorrow. That'll come in an email. And another question asking about an acronym, CIO. That's obviously Chief Information Officer.
Great. Well, I want to thank everyone for joining us. Thank you, Spence, for taking the time and sharing some of your insights. We encourage everyone to check out GovShop data online and do your own research, and let us know, if you have any questions about search, any capabilities of firms, and we're happy to help you as well. And just reach out to us. We're here for you. And like Frank said, we'll be sharing all the information, including a recap, pretty quickly. So thank you so much, and thanks Spence again for joining.
Anytime.